Judge insults royal guard in court. Minutes later, he gets him arrested. A judge publicly humiliated a royal guard during a routine court hearing, only to find himself in handcuffs when his behavior crossed the line. The silent serviceman's unexpected response left the entire courtroom stunned. Here's what happened. Now, before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And make sure to subscribe because tomorrow at this very same time, we're dropping another powerful royal guard story that you won't want to miss. The morning sun glinted off the polished brass buttons of Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood's scarlet tunic as he ascended the stone steps of Westminster Crown Court. Passers-by slowed their hurried London pace, some pausing to stare at the unexpected sight of a Queen's Guard in full ceremonial dress outside his usual post. A small child tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed, the excitement in his eyes capturing the enduring mystique that surrounded the historic regiment. Blackwood was accustomed to the attention. 8 years with the Queen's Guard had taught him to exist comfortably under the public gaze, to transform from man to living symbol with the donning of the uniform. At 32, Blackwood cut an imposing figure even by Royal Guard standards. 6 feet 2 inches with shoulders squared by 8 years of military discipline. His bare skin cap added another foot to his already considerable height, making him impossible to miss among the barristers and solicitors in their traditional black robes. Blackwood had not planned to visit the courthouse today. His appearance as a witness in a burglary case had been scheduled for next week, but an urgent call from the Crown Prosecutor's office had requested his presence immediately. The case involved a break-in he had witnessed while off duty, a simple matter of being in the right place at the right time. Having provided his statement months ago, he expected to confirm his account briefly and return to his scheduled duties at Buckingham Palace. "Quite the entrance you're making," remarked a court clerk as Blackwood presented his identification at the security checkpoint. "We don't see many of the Queen's finest in these halls." "Duty called twice today, it seems," Blackwood replied with a slight smile that quickly returned to his practiced neutral expression. Years of standing motionless before crowds of tourists had given him a mastery of his features that few civilian observers could comprehend. The security officer, a former military man himself, judging by his bearing, gave Blackwood a respectful nod as he passed through the metal detector. "Served with the Royal Marines myself," the man said quietly. "Always good to see one of ours maintaining standards." Blackwood acknowledged the comment with a slight nod. His uniform had been prepared with the same meticulous attention he gave it every day. Scarlet tunic brushed to perfection, brass buttons polished to a mirror shine, white belt gleaming. Though some might consider it excessive for a brief court appearance, Blackwood knew no other way to present himself when representing the regiment. A young assistant carrying a stack of legal files nearly collided with him as he turned a corner. She stopped short, eyes widening at the unexpected sight of his ceremonial uniform. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "Are you here for the Morrison case? It's about to begin in Courtroom 7. "Yes, thank you," Blackwood confirmed. He checked his watch, an understated timepiece that had been his grandfather's, a man who had served in the same regiment during the Second World War. He had 15 minutes to locate the courtroom and take his position. Plenty of time for a man who measured his life in seconds of precision. Courtroom 7 boasted the austere grandeur of British judicial tradition. Dark oak paneling absorbed the sound of hushed conversations, while portraits of stern-faced former judges gazed down from above. As Lieutenant Blackwood entered, conversations momentarily faltered, heads turning to assess the unexpected splash of ceremonial scarlet among the somber legal attire. He located an empty seat in the back row of the public gallery, positioning himself with military precision, back straight, feet at the proper angle, hands resting lightly on his knees. Despite the civilian setting, his bearing remained every inch that of a Queen's Guard. Several people nearby shifted slightly, unconsciously creating more space for him, as if his uniform demanded a particular difference. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Victor Harrington," called the clerk as a side door opened. Judge Harrington emerged with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding a room. At 58, he carried himself with the practiced authority of his 25 years on the bench. His reputation preceded him, brilliant, but temperamental, with a particularly caustic attitude toward those he perceived as wasting the court's time. His thin lips rarely smiled, and his eyes, behind expensive wire-rimmed glasses, held the perpetual calculation of a man assessing weaknesses. The son of a factory foreman who had fought his way through law school, Harrington had developed a complex relationship with authority and hierarchy. His ascent to the bench had been marked by both academic brilliance and a relentless ambition that occasionally manifested as cruelty toward those he deemed intellectually inferior. Colleagues tolerated his abrasive personality because of his undeniable legal mind, but few sought his company outside the courthouse. His marriage had ended a decade earlier, his wife citing emotional remoteness in divorce proceedings that Harrington had approached with the same clinical detachment he brought to his cases. Now the courtroom was both his domain and his refuge, the one place where his word was quite literally law. As the gallery returned to their seats, Harrington's gaze swept the courtroom with practiced efficiency. His eyes paused imperceptibly when they reached Blackwood, a momentary falter in his rhythm before he took his seat at the bench. The Morrison case began routinely enough. A straightforward burglary with the prosecutor laying out the charges in measured tones. 3 witnesses would testify to the defendant's presence near the scene. Lieutenant Blackwood would be the 4th. His testimony expected to be brief and conclusive. Yet, as the proceedings continued, Blackwood noticed Harrington's attention repeatedly drifting toward him. Between examining documents and addressing counsel, the judge's eyes returned to the back row with increasing frequency. His questions to the first witness seemed distracted, his usual incisive interrogation lacking its characteristic precision. "Your Honor," the defense barrister ventured during one particularly long silence. "Shall I continue with my line of questioning?" Harrington's focus snapped back to the case at hand, but not before casting another glance at the scarlet-uniformed figure whose very presence seemed to unsettle his courtroom's carefully maintained hierarchy. Halfway through the second witness's testimony, Judge Harrington abruptly rapped his gavel, silencing the prosecutor mid-question. "Before we continue," Harrington announced, his voice carrying the practiced projection of decades on the bench, "I feel compelled to address a matter of courtroom decorum," his gaze fixed directly on Lieutenant Blackwood. "You there in the costume, would you care to explain your choice of attire in my courtroom?" A stunned silence fell. The prosecutor turned, clearly confused by this unexpected interruption of his case. Blackwood rose to his feet with military precision.
Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood, Your Honor, Queen's Guard, 3rd Battalion.
"I am on active duty and scheduled to report to my post following these proceedings." "I see," Harrington replied, his tone suggesting he saw something entirely different. "And you felt it appropriate to appear in full ceremonial dress rather than civilian attire. This is a court of law, Lieutenant, not a tourist attraction. With respect, Your Honor, regulations require service members to appear in uniform when representing the regiment in an official capacity. Are you suggesting that a minor burglary case constitutes official regimental business?" "No, Your Honor, however, as I am scheduled for ceremonial duty immediately following." "Yes." "Yes," Harrington interrupted with a dismissive wave, standing perfectly still while Japanese tourists take photographs.
Hardly the pressing military mate you make it sound. A murmur ran through the courtroom.
The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, if we might return to the witness testimony." "In a moment," Harrington countered, his attention still fixed on Blackwood. "I find this display distracting to the serious business of justice." The theatrical bear-kneed hat, in particular, seems designed to draw attention rather than show respect for these proceedings. Blackwood remained at perfect attention, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts. "Your Honor, the bear skin cap is part of the ceremonial uniform established by royal decree in 1815. I would be out of uniform without it." "Ceremonial," Harrington repeated, infusing the word with disdain. An apt description for a role that exists primarily for pageantry rather than substance. "Wouldn't you agree?" The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, I must object to this line of objection noted and overruled."
Harrington snapped. "This is my courtroom, and matters of decorum fall squarely within my authority."
He returned his attention to Blackwood, who had remained perfectly composed throughout the exchange. "Tell me, Lieutenant, does your training include anything beyond marching in straight lines and standing motionless, or is that the full extent of your capabilities?" The insult hung in the air, shocking in its nakedness. 2 elderly men in the gallery exchanged glances, their lapel pins identifying them as veterans of earlier conflicts. "My training includes extensive tactical and strategic education, sir," Blackwood responded evenly, "as well as legal familiarization with the Military Justice Act and civilian military jurisdictional boundaries." Something in the precise delivery of this response seemed to further aggravate Harrington. "Very impressive," he remarked, sarcasm dripping from each syllable. Perhaps you'd care to remove the ridiculous hat while in my courtroom. Or does military discipline not extend to basic courtroom respect? The King's regulations stipulate that headgear is removed indoors except when under arms or on ceremonial duty. Sir, I am currently both. Judge Harrington's jaw tightened visibly, his composure slipping further with each perfectly measured response from the lieutenant. He leaned forward, fingers steepled on the bench before him. Let me be perfectly clear, Lieutenant. In this courtroom, my authority supersedes your military regulations. I find your presence in that theatrical uniform disruptive and your responses bordering on insolent. The prosecutor rose again. Your Honor, Lieutenant Blackwood is here as a witness for the Crown. His testimony is vital to, are you attempting to instruct me on how to conduct proceedings in my own courtroom? Mr. Palmer, Harrington snapped, his voice sharp enough to make the prosecutor physically recoil. Sit down. Turning back to Blackwood, Harrington's expression had hardened into something approaching contempt. Tell me, Lieutenant, do you find it difficult to think for yourself after years of blindly following orders? Or were you selected for guard duty precisely because of that particular quality?
A ripple of shocked whisper spread through the gallery.
One of the elderly veterans in the third row half rose from his seat before his companion placed a restraining hand on his arm. Even the defendant looked uncomfortable with the judge's behavior. Your Honor, Blackwood replied, his voice remaining steady. British military service emphasizes both discipline and independent critical thinking. The Queen's Guard is selected from soldiers with exemplary service records, many with combat experience. We follow lawful orders while maintaining our capacity for independent judgment. Harrington laughed, a short, dismissive sound entirely devoid of humor. How wonderfully rehearsed. Did they provide that little speech along with the costume? He gestured contemptuously toward Blackwood's medal ribbons and these colorful decorations, participation awards for standing still. The court recorder's fingers faltered momentarily over her stenotype machine, clearly uncomfortable documenting the judge's increasingly inappropriate remarks. The Distinguished Service Cross was awarded for actions during the evacuation of civilians under fire in Helmand Province. Your Honor, Blackwood stated simply. The ribbon beside it represents the Queen's Gallantry Medal for disarming an explosive device that threatened a school. Though his words were factual and devoid of embellishment, they carried the weight of unspoken experiences. What Blackwood didn't mention was the searing Afghan heat as he'd carried 2 injured children through open terrain, the distinctive crack of sniper fire sending dust spouts around his boots with each step. Nor did he speak of the 37 agonizing minutes he'd spent with the improvised explosive device. His hands steady despite knowing that the slightest tremor would mean death for himself and the 200 schoolchildren in the building. Those memories lived in the nightmares that occasionally still woke him. Private burdens that had forged the disciplined man who now stood in this courtroom being mocked for his costume. One of the veterans nodded in grim satisfaction at this revelation. The other whispered something that made several nearby spectators turn in surprise.
Harrington's face flushed deeper. Your combat fairy tales don't impress me, Lieutenant.
Men who need to dress up in costumes and parade around for tourists clearly missed something vital in their development. Article 68 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice acknowledges that ceremonial duties serve a vital function in maintaining public trust and institutional continuity. Your Honor, Blackwood responded. His precise citation delivered without reference to notes. The European Court of Human Rights has similarly recognized the cultural and institutional value of ceremonial military roles in Hemmings versus the United Kingdom 2007. Harrington pushed himself to his feet, looming over the courtroom from his elevated position. Are you attempting to lecture me on legal matters, Lieutenant? 25 years on this bench, and I'm being given a law lesson by a toy soldier. No, Your Honor, I'm simply responding to your questions with factual information.
Factuelle information?
Harrington repeated, his voice rising. Let me give you some factual information, Lieutenant. I find your presence, your manner, and your carefully constructed responses contemptuous of this court. I am holding you in contempt immediately. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. Your Honor, on what grounds? The lieutenant has been entirely respectful in his sit down, Mr. Palmer, or you'll join him, Harrington shouted, his judicial composure now completely abandoned. The grounds are that I am the presiding judge in this courtroom, and I determine what constitutes contempt. Blackwood remained standing at perfect attention, his expression unchanged despite the threat. Your Honor, with respect, the Contempt of Court Act of 1981 requires that contempt be demonstrated through willful disrespect or obstruction of proceedings. I have been neither disrespectful nor obstructive.
Der, Harrington jabbed a finger toward Blackwood.
That right there is your contempt, questioning my authority in my own courtroom. The tension in Courtroom 7 had reached a breaking point. The scheduled case had been completely derailed. All attention now focused on the increasingly volatile confrontation between the enraged judge and the composed lieutenant. Perhaps, Blackwood suggested with measured calm, Your Honor might wish to consult Section 14 of the Judicial Conduct Guidelines regarding temperament and impartiality in court proceedings. Judge Harrington's face contorted with fury, his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the bench. How dare you, he hissed through clenched teeth. How dare you stand there in your costume and cite judicial guidelines to me? I've forgotten more law than you'll ever know. The elderly veterans exchanged meaningful glances. The court recorder continued typing, though her expression betrayed increasing alarm. The courts have consistently upheld the principle that contempt must be clearly demonstrated, not merely declared. Your Honor, Blackwood continued. In Regina Thompson, Lord Justice Blackwell specifically noted that enough. Harrington roared, his control finally snapping. In a motion born of pure impulse rather than thought, he snatched up his gavel and hurled it directly at Lieutenant Blackwood. The courtroom erupted in gasps as the heavy wooden gavel sailed across the space between them. With a swift, fluid movement that seemed impossibly fast given his formal stance, Blackwood's hand shot up and caught the projectile midair, his reflexes honed by years of military training. Complete silence fell over the courtroom. Blackwood stood perfectly still, the judge's gavel now held in his white-gloved hand. For a breathless moment, no one moved or spoke. The implications of what had just occurred seemed to ripple through the assembled crowd in slow motion. Judge Harrington himself appeared momentarily stunned by his own action, his empty hand, still half raised where it had released the gavel. Then, as the reality of what he had done began to register, his expression shifted from shock to something approaching fear. That Lieutenant Blackwood stated into the silence, his voice carrying without being raised, was assault on a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces. A criminal offense under Section 39 of the Criminal Justice Act. He placed the gavel carefully on the nearest table, his movements deliberate and controlled. Additionally, the act constitutes judicial misconduct under Section 27 of the Courts Act, improper behavior while presiding over court proceedings and violation of Judicial Canon 3 regarding maintaining order and decorum. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Lieutenant Blackwood removed his bare skin cap, revealing close-cropped dark hair beneath. The gesture somehow transformed him from ceremonial figure to something more immediately authoritative. With respect, Your Honor, he continued, his gaze level and direct. I believe this situation now requires formal intervention. Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood, Queen's Guard, 3rd Battalion, the soldier began, his voice carrying a new note of authority that commanded the entire room's attention. Before joining the military, I served as a barrister with the Judge Advocate General's Corps after completing my law degree at Oxford with first-class honors specializing in constitutional and military jurisprudence.
A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom.
Judge Harrington's face had drained of color, the realization dawning that he had not been berating a simple ceremonial guard, but a highly qualified legal professional. I maintain my legal credentials and continue legal education during off-duty hours, Blackwood continued, which is why I recognized immediately that Your Honor's behavior today constitutes multiple violations of both criminal and judicial ethics codes. He turned slightly to address the court security officers who had moved forward at the commotion. Officers, what you have just witnessed was an unprovoked physical assault by a sitting judge against a witness. This constitutes a Category 2 offense under the Judicial Code of Conduct, requiring immediate security intervention. The security personnel exchanged uncertain glances, clearly torn between their duty to maintain order and the unprecedented situation of a judge being accused of misconduct in his own courtroom. This is absurd, Harrington sputtered, finding his voice at last.
I am the presiding judge here.
You cannot possibly. Section 31 of the Courts Act specifically states that when a judge commits a criminal offense in open court, normal jurisdictional protections are suspended, Blackwood interrupted, his legal knowledge flowing with the precision of someone quoting from memory. The Judicial Conduct Investigations Office established clear precedent in the case of Judge Martin Harlow 2016, when he was removed from the bench after verbally abusing a witness. He gestured toward the court recorder. Every word of this incident has been recorded in the official transcript, including Your Honor's unprovoked insults regarding military service and the physical assault with the gavel. The elderly veterans had risen to their feet.
The Talley one stepped forward. Commandant William Hastings, retire de Royal Navy.
I witnessed the entire incident and can confirm Lieutenant Blackwood's account. His companion joined him. Colonel James Rutherford, formerly of the Royal Marines, I also witnessed Judge Harrington's assault and am prepared to provide a formal statement. Blackwood nodded his thanks to them before continuing. The assault witnessed by this courtroom carries a maximum sentence of 6 months imprisonment under current sentencing guidelines. The misconduct while holding judicial office can result in permanent disbarment. Harrington's face had gone from ashen to mottled red. This is nothing but an orchestrated attempt to undermine my authority. I will not be lectured in my own courtroom by a man playing dress-up soldier. Your Honor, the court clerk interjected cautiously. The lieutenant is correct about the protocols. When a criminal offense occurs in open court, are you taking his side? Harrington snapped, his composure completely abandoned. The senior court security officer had made his decision. He approached the bench with professional calm. Your Honor, I am required to report this incident to the chief magistrate immediately. Until this matter is resolved, I must ask you to step down from the bench.
10 is outrageux.
Harrington's fist pounded the wood before him. I am a Crown Court judge. You cannot remove me on the word of a ceremonial guardsman. With respect, Your Honor, Blackwood responded, your position makes this offense more serious, not less. The Judiciary Act holds judges to a higher standard precisely because of the power entrusted to them. The courtroom doors opened as another security officer entered, accompanied by a distinguished older woman in judicial robes. Judge Elizabeth Chamberlain, Chief Magistrate, she announced crisply. I was in the building for a conference and received an urgent security alert. Her keen eyes took in the scene, noting the tension and Harrington's obvious distress. What has happened here? Before anyone could respond, the court recorder spoke up. Mom, I have the complete transcript of the incident. Judge Harrington verbally abused a military witness and then physically threw his gavel at him.
Judge Chamberlain's expression hardened. Victor, is this true?
Harrington's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight visibly draining from him as he faced a peer. Elizabeth, this has been blown completely out of proportion. The guard was being insolent, disrupting my courtroom with his theatrical uniform and the transcript. Please, Chamberlain interrupted, extending her hand toward the recorder. As she quickly scanned the document, her expression grew increasingly grave. Finally, she looked up first at Harrington, then at Lieutenant Blackwood.
Security, please escort Judge Harrington to my chambers.
He is relieved of his duties pending a full investigation. Her tone left no room for argument. Lieutenant, I'll need your formal statement.
Colonel Rutherford, Commandant Hastings, you are well.
Judge Harrington seemed to physically shrink as the security officers approached the bench. Elizabeth, you can't possibly be taking this seriously, he protested weakly. My record of service will be considered alongside today's actions. Judge Chamberlain cut him off firmly. The transcript speaks for itself, Victor. Assaulting a witness in open court, disparaging military service.
This goes beyond a momentary lapse in judgment.
As the security officers escorted Harrington from his own courtroom, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Lieutenant Blackwood watched without expression, his military bearing unchanged despite the extraordinary reversal that had just unfolded. Lieutenant Judge Chamberlain addressed him. On behalf of the judiciary, I apologize for this inappropriate treatment. Your service to the Crown deserves respect, not ridicule. Blackwood inclined his head slightly.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I understand that Judge Harrington's behavior today is not representative of the bench. With the courtroom still in stunned silence, Lieutenant Blackwood replaced his bare skin cap with military precision and checked his watch. With the court's permission, I'm scheduled to take my post at Buckingham Palace in 40 minutes. Of course, Judge Chamberlain replied, your statement can be taken later today. This court stands adjourned until tomorrow morning. Lieutenant Blackwood departed the courthouse with several observers nodding respectfully as he passed. The two veterans offered crisp salutes, which he returned with equal precision before stepping out into the London afternoon. His sense of duty unaltered by the morning's extraordinary events. As Lieutenant took his ceremonial position outside Buckingham Palace an hour later, tourists gathered with their cameras, unaware of the extraordinary morning he'd experienced. The scarlet uniform and bare skin cap that had made him a target of Judge Harrington's contempt now drew the admiring glances of visitors from around the world. The irony wasn't lost on him, though his expression revealed nothing as he stood at perfect attention. Back at Westminster Crown Court, the Morrison case had been reassigned to another judge. The defendant looking visibly relieved that his trial would proceed without further theatrical interruptions. The court recorder had already been interviewed by representatives from the Judicial Conduct Investigations Office, her transcript serving as the primary evidence in what was quickly becoming a high-profile misconduct case. Judge Harrington sat alone in a small anteroom, his judicial robes removed, waiting for his solicitor to arrive. 25 years on the bench, hundreds of cases adjudicated, and now his career hung in the balance because of a moment's loss of control. The gavel that had become a projectile weapon now sat in an evidence bag, photographed and documented as if it were a knife or gun. He stared at his hands, wondering how they had betrayed him so completely. News of the incident spread quickly through legal circles. By evening, several barristers who had appeared before Harrington over the years had come forward with their own accounts of his intimidating behavior and questionable temperament. What had begun as a single confrontation was expanding into a pattern of conduct that would likely end his judicial career. Meanwhile, a senior officer at the Queen's Guard headquarters had received a full report of the incident. Rather than being reprimanded for becoming involved in a courtroom disruption, Lieutenant Blackwood found a brief note of commendation in his file. The following morning maintained dignity of the regiment while upholding principles of justice. It read, signed by his commanding colonel. What would you do if faced with someone who abused their authority to belittle others? Lieutenant Blackwood's story reminds us that true strength lies not in shouting the loudest or holding the highest position, but in maintaining composure while standing firm for what's right. Behind the ceremonial uniform that Judge Harrington mocked stood a man of exceptional intelligence, discipline, and moral courage. Qualities that ultimately revealed the judge's own shortcomings. Sometimes the people we're quickest to dismiss based on appearances are the very ones who have the most to teach us about integrity and respect. If this story made you think about the importance of looking beyond appearances and standing up to abuse of power, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about royal guards and the values they represent.
Press the bell icon to never miss or upload.
And check out the other videos appearing on your screen right now. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their appearance or job only to discover hidden depths you never expected? Or have you witnessed someone in authority abusing their position? Share your experiences in the comments below. We read everyone and would love to hear your thoughts. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time with another brand new video.